Whistle a blow, and now I know that we're going. We've just started. Yes, we've departed. Why, we're leaving the pier. I say we're steaming from New York Bay. That's why I feel so gay. If we get there on time, I'll be mighty happy. If we're not there on time, why, I'll feel mighty bad, 'cause we'll sure have some time. Way down in Louisiana, here's what makes them all feel glad.
Just the captain from Pirates of the Quarter Tours. Yes.
Sounds good.
I know. It's so goofy.
The peak of the pirate golden age is estimated to be between 1716 to 1730, but long before and after, pirates had been roaming the seas of the earth and changing the histories around it. Pirates had a unique position in history by being seen as both criminals and assets in many aspects of everyday life, governing, and colonialization. Away from the prying eyes of various European governing bodies, many pirates sought refuge throughout the Caribbean. However, their world became smaller as expansion into the New World grew. As pirates brewed between various European countries fighting for land in the Americas, pirates or privateers were often used as off the books employees, aiding in the colonization and management of these new untamed lands. Some pirates didn't need permission or pay from officials to run the show of a town or city or even a whole territory. Many acted independently and often chaotically. One such pirate is said to be one of the fathers of New Orleans, the symbol of what New Orleans really is: wild, liberated, off the beaten path, crooked, shrouded in mystery, and often found in a bar. Specifically, said bar is Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop, one of the oldest consistently running bars in the U.S. Today, it functions as a watering hole for tourists and locals alike, and in the days of Jean Lafitte, it was his brother Pierre's smuggling business that helped put him on the map. From being involved in the War of 1812 to being pardoned by President Madison, only to go back to piracy shortly afterward, Jean Lafitte and the legacy of piracy are part of what makes New Orleans the city that care forgot. Today, we talk about pirates, swashbucklers, con artists, war, Jean Lafitte, and good drinking with bad company in Crescent Crime with our guest, the Captain, who can tell us all about the cads and hooligans that made us, San Francisco, and New York better than Cleveland. All right. Tell me all about... First of all, let's start off with what exactly the distinction is between pirate, privateer, and how they went from Europe to the Caribbean to what we now consider to be North America.
Being a pirate, obviously, and a privateer, they're basically the same thing, okay? It is. It's the same thing. It's just a name. It's just a title. The difference is that with a privateer, okay, a pirate, you're just a person who commits a crime out at sea. There you go. You're a criminal on the water. A privateer is someone who does the exact same thing, but they usually have what's called a letter of marque. Okay, a letter of marque is basically a license to commit piracy. Okay, for instance, say you're France, okay, and you are in a war with Spain. Okay, I have a ship, I have a crew, and you know what we know how to do? Blow things up. Okay, so I would raise the white flag, approach you as Spain, and then we would converse, and I would say, hey, listen, you're in a war over here with France. How about I, with my badass crew and my ship, go sink some French ships? All I ask in return is you let me keep whatever I capture off of those ships, right? And you're like, well, wait a minute. That seems like a darn good idea, because you'll use your men. I don't have to use mine. Your supplies, not mine. Okay, and you would write me a letter of marque. Well, guess what I can do now? I can legally go attack all the French ships I want, right? So what do you think I'm going to do as a pirate? I'm immediately going to go over to France. And I'm going to find my first French ship. Am I going to blow it out of the water? Absolutely not. I'm going to go and I'm going to make friends with those guys. And they're going to write me a letter of marque to go attack Spanish ships. There's not a lot of trust in the pirate world. So basically, you're a privateer with a license to go be a pirate. And that way, if say Spain approaches us and they're like, hey, you guys are pirates, you're not allowed to attack us. Wait a minute, hold on, we've got a letter of marque here, we're street legal. It's all semantics. Yeah, it's a license to pirate.
So why the Caribbean? Why did so many European pirates come down to the Caribbean and find safe haven there? I mean, we even see this in pop culture with the Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's like party central in a lot of those islands.
The islands are really a stopping off point. Okay, you have to think of everything, all the valuable products that merchants are going to ship from Europe, Africa, India, all around the world. they're ultimately going to go to the south here, New Orleans, Central America, and the Caribbean islands. Well, the Caribbean islands are a resting spot. Okay, you got all these shipping lanes, and shipping lanes are like superhighways. You're just going to follow that shipping lane from Europe down through the Caribbean to Mexico or South America, Central America. It was like to make a horrible analogy, it's like a Buc-ee's. I mean, that's a terrible way to put it, but I
You're
mean
right.
that's basically what it is. It's a stopping off point. So when you've got a bunch of guys waiting, sitting around waiting, you're literally like if you went and sat by the highway and watched Amazon trucks go by, you'd figure out a pattern. I'm not suggesting you do this, of course, but you could. And what are you going to do? Oh, here comes an Amazon truck. Let's go get it. The shipping lanes are basically the same thing. You just sit around and wait. Well, you're not necessarily sitting around and waiting. It's a lot of work involved, but yeah, it's the superhighway to this part of the world.
Do you think this impeded or helped like developing towns and cities in these new areas and in North America and the New World? Because when pirates are basically like your comparison, stealing from Amazon trucks, in one way that may impede development, but at the same time they also established a lot of these towns and villages and whatever that brought in small businesses and bars and socialization. So I mean, do you think they sort of helped and were the founding fathers of the New World, or that they impeded it and we may have settled a lot earlier?
That's a great question. Yeah, I would say they, from my perspective anyway, they helped in a lot of ways. You have to think of it this way. Not all of us are rich. We're not all living in mansions on a hill. Okay, people need to work. They need to eat. They need to survive from day to day. Yeah, pirates may have gone about it the wrong way from time to time, but you know what? If you're desperate and you need something for your family or your house, and you're going to buy it from a pirate or someone who bought it from a pirate, a merchant, and then you go buy from that merchant, well, that's stolen goods, but do you care at the end of the day?
Yeah.
And they are getting you your stuff, and maybe the prices are a little cheaper too, because there's not as much overhead with a pirate.
Well, despite being criminals, I had heard that pirates were actually very socially progressive in a lot of aspects in their own culture that they kind of created, being on the seas and being away from prying eyes of governing bodies. So, in what ways would you describe pirate culture and how they had a very different view of the world in comparison to land dwellers?
Well, I mean, it's kind of the same, really, between land and sea. I mean, they did spend a lot of time on land, obviously, as well. And it's a community. It doesn't matter where you go, right? If you started a new job somewhere, when you start that job, yeah, you've got to do the job. You got to learn where the coffee maker is and the bathroom is and all those things. But there's a culture, right? Doesn't matter if you work for one company and then a year later you work for a completely different company. There's going to be a different style, different culture within that company. Pirates are kind of the same thing, okay? A lot of times, most pirates, and people don't realize this when you watch your pirate movies, is that they're not just sitting around drinking rum all day, okay? There's a lot of work involved. And a lot of pirates were young men, 15, 25 years of age, okay? Well, you're not having a 26th birthday. Let's keep it that way. Okay?
Yeah.
It isn't exactly the most safe job that you're going to get. But what happens is they're just looking for an odd job. For instance, like a port city like New Orleans or any of the port cities around the Caribbean, right? You might be a guy who's down on his luck and hasn't had work for a while, so you're pretty desperate. But you might have skills. Maybe you know how to do gunpowder. Maybe you know how to sew sails. Maybe you're a carpenter, right? You're sitting in a bar, because that's probably where a guy's going to go to drown his sorrows, and you're sitting there with a bunch of other guys that have some sort of valuable skill. Well, a pirate captain or someone who works on a pirate ship might come in there to get drunk himself, but he might need some guys. And he might be heading out in a couple weeks. Hey, I'm looking for some guys. I need a guy who can sew sails. I need a guy who can run gunpowder. I need a guy who can navigate. I need a guy who can do this. I need a cook. And you're sitting there and you haven't had work for months and you're poor and you're desperate and you're like, well, I can sew the hell out of some sails. Well, congratulations, you just got yourself a job. You may go out for 6 months to a year. You'll be treated fairly as long as you do your work, which they would do. They would treat you fairly. They'll pay you at the end of it, and then you're done. Now, maybe you just go on and say, okay, well, that wasn't for me, and then you go do something else with your life. Or you're like, that is kind of cool, so I'm into it. Now, another flip side to that is, the Navy. Okay, navies of the world, they got rules. They got, very strict rules to be in the Navy back then. There were beatings and all these other things, and you didn't get paid very much. And, there was a lot that you had to deal with. Pirates don't have any of that stuff. A lot of people who were in the Navy, I don't want to say a lot, but there were people from the Navy who would just be like, well, wait a minute, I have skills too. why am I being in the Navy when I can go make the same money over here with
Just
these guys?
transfer.
That's why a lot of times if you watch your pirate movies, you'll see these guys that'll have like jackets on, but they're all beat up. It's because they're probably either one of two things: ex-Navy, because they have skills, right? That are valuable on a ship, so pirates are going to want those guys. Or, if you're a pirate and you killed a guy who was in the Navy, well, then you got yourself a nice jacket and a cool tricorn hat. So yeah, there's a culture. They treated each other fairly well. You're on a ship. Where are you going to go? You're going to have to be kind of cool to each other.
So when you just mentioned like that there were former Navy in piracy, is that why piracy was so scrutinized and vilified by the governments because they were hanging pirates for treason? Is this like a deterrent essentially to make sure that people from the Navy didn't keep flooding out and going into piracy, and that's why it was so heavily punished?
I mean, yeah, I would assume it's punishable that way. But I think you got to also look at it as there is a reason why there was so much law going after the pirates. Okay, the Navy thing. Okay, I get it. It's a nuisance. But the Navy could kick their ass, from a pirate standpoint. If they really wanted to concentrate their efforts, they could blow the pirates out of the water if they wanted to. It's the people who run the shipping companies from around the world. It's the people who run the wharfs and the merchants, the big money, right? It's the money. Those are the ones who really wanted piracy over. Because look, if you're stealing from my warehouse for a modern, comparison, you're stealing from my warehouse. You're also stealing from my trucks. You're also stealing from my store. I'm never getting any products to market, so I'm not making any money. So it's the businesses that really went after the pirates in a lot of ways.
Well, since a lot of these guys were out of work for extended periods of time, piracy peaked in the 18th century. Was there a recession going on in Europe at the time, or some kind of an economic struggle? I mean, God knows there was a ton of war in that century. So was that a contributing factor? Did essentially these governments help create piracy by not having financial and economic stability and job opportunities for young people?
I can't really speak to that era of piracy. I mean, I'm more of a early 1800s guy and I know that more than most, but more than I do the 1700s. But that being said, again, it goes back to I need a job, man. I got to eat. I got a family. I got this. So I can only assume that we have crime today. I mean, people are hurting. They're going to find a way, and it may not always go by the book, and it may not follow all the rules. So I can only assume that was part of it. And then you've got people who become great leaders. You're going to have great famous captains throughout history that, they start to build, they get a ship. Well, next thing you know, they got 2 ships and they got 5 ships and they go from 50 guys to 75 guys to 200 guys. And then, of course, you start to deal with ego and all those things and you just keep expanding. And next thing you know, you've got a whole island to yourself down in the Caribbean somewhere and you're off robbing all these ships. So it can expand that way as well.
Well, and there were so many famous pirates that came to what we now consider the United States, and it's because it was very resource rich and a lot of trading going on. And so I'm curious, who started founding a lot of these cities and towns in the United States and in the Caribbean? So it was Jean Lafitte had a hand in having a lot of authority. Were there any other noteworthy pirates in like what we consider today as Florida or Alabama, Mississippi, anywhere else in the Gulf Coast area?
There were a lot of various pirates. I mean, if you go way back, Blackbeard was up and down the East Coast for many years in the 1700s, and he had one heck of a thing going on over there. Didn't end well for him, obviously. That didn't go so well. But yeah, there were a lot of different pirates that were all over the area. Now, I can't really speak to those guys. I can only really speak to Jean Lafitte. But there was piracy happening here. To kind of answer the question a different way, is that you have to think about the United States. We're brand new. We are vast. Okay, Europe's tiny. Europe is so small. It's not so hard to kind of keep an eye on ports and stuff around Europe. The United States was uncharted. It was chaos. Nobody knew anything. We're scrambling. You had states fighting with each other. They all had different rules. The country doesn't know what's going on. I mean, we're a brand new thing. So we're figuring it out. So what are we? We are ripe for lawlessness. So you got to think of it that way too,
So with Southern Louisiana, so tell me about how pirates first started coming into Southern Louisiana and why they started settling there. What was the appeal to start settling there, build up shop, build up homes? Because Pierre Lafitte had the blacksmith shop. So what was the incentive other than being a great location? Was there something about it where they're like, hey, I can get some authority here, and I can establish something, a real business.
Why they came here in the beginning, that's kind of a tough question, but you have to look at it as New Orleans when we got going. Okay, 1718, the whole thing. All right, here we go. Let's put a city in the middle of the swamps where it's 200 degrees all the time and mosquitoes and hurricanes. Good idea, by the way. And we've been struggling ever since, obviously. But the reason was because of the Mississippi River. Okay, we're a port city. Now, the port of New Orleans isn't really exactly close to the Gulf. It just kind of dissipates into swampland once you leave New Orleans and you head south. But you're not that far from the Caribbean islands. Caribbean islands are full of products, full of slaves, unfortunately, right? New Orleans, in the early days, we started the thing and then we had no people. Well, you need people to start a place. You need people to do work. You need people to have a tax base. So what happens was we were looking all over Europe, France, Paris. There were posters all over Paris. Hey, send us, come on over to New Orleans. And they would put a poster up with a big sunrise, mountains, beaches. We don't have beaches or mountains here. But, advertising may not always be true. And then it got to the point where we couldn't get people to come here. So they started they just said, okay, well, let's empty the jails. And they made deals with prisoners over in France and said, go to New Orleans. You can get out of jail, but you got to go to New Orleans. And it's like, well, jail, New Orleans, at the time, kind of was probably worse to be here, and prostitutes. Well, send them over too. And that's what happened. So we were founded by that. And then people are traveling, looking for work. Again, you got to think of it this way. We're brand new. It's wide open space. There's really no rules or laws. Sure, we had some, but did we though? Really? You can get away with a lot back then. So then as the shipping lanes are moving around the Caribbean, well, you can rob a ship and then you can get some things up through Barataria Bay, through the swamps, to this brand new city called New Orleans.
What were some of the products that were being traded that were huge in New Orleans that the pirates were like, we can make a ton of money off of these products?
Wow, good question. Anything you can get your hands on would be the first answer, right? Because, it kind of goes back to one of the myths about pirates and treasure. Okay, people are like, well, you're a guy who knows a lot about pirates. You must be rich because you know where all the treasure is located. Yeah, that's not really how it works because treasure was really just something of value. Okay, I may hit a ship that is filled with furniture. You know what that furniture is? Treasure. Because I'm going to take that furniture and I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to sell that stuff. Someone's going to buy it. Someone needs furniture, right? So that was my treasure, okay? Or you would trade it. And, a lot of times money wasn't involved. You would trade this product for a product. You're like, hey, your rings are cool. Well, they are, but, I really like that shirt. We make a trade. Be a weird trade, but you get the idea. That being said, almost anything would be the product. Now, the product of the day, you'd have bananas, you'd have sugar cane, you'd have sugar, you'd have coffee, you'd have all the typical products coming from South America, heading somewhere else. But, well, there's going to be a detour because the pirates are going to make that detour happen.
Man, well, tell me a little bit about Jean Lafitte specifically. When he came to New Orleans, was he born in Southern Louisiana? Was he born in the Caribbean? Was he born in France? Because I've seen some conflicting information regarding that.
That's the beauty of the pirate world. Okay, you want to go look up George Washington. Great, you can learn a lot about George Washington. Chances are most of it's probably pretty accurate. You start diving into the pirate world, things get pretty loose pretty quick. So what you have to do, and what we've done is, you do all the research, but then you start cross-referencing things because the further you go out into the weeds, things really get wild, right? And then you start seeing like, well, okay, wait a minute. There's 3 people or 3 sources saying this one thing, and then there's this other thing. Well, that other thing may be cooler, but those other 3, you kind of got to play your odds. So that's where we base our research that we've done for this company. That being said, someone may dispute what I've got to say. That's okay. That's okay because you know what it is? We're keeping this alive. We're having these conversations. That's a cool thing. Jean Lafitte and his brother Pierre, born over in France, okay? And what they did is they grew up on their father's ship, okay? Dear old dad was a merchant, A merchant's just someone who moves stuff around, right? He drove the Amazon truck, to put it in modern terms. You know what I mean? That being said, when you grow up on dear old dad's ship, from the time you're a very young boy, what are you going to learn about? Shipping, navigating, reading charts and graphs, moving merchandise. Pretty useful skills for when you made some choices later in life that may not have been the best, but you've got on-the-job training. And what was really interesting is they were given a decent education. These guys could read and write, okay, which is huge in that time period. You have to think about that. A lot of people couldn't read and write. That's an advantage. Pierre Lafitte could speak French and English. And Pierre was the older brother, by the way. Pierre was the older brother. Jean Lafitte was the younger brother. Jean Lafitte could speak English, French, Spanish, and Italian. Okay. Now, whether they were completely fluent or not, who knows? But they could get it done, and that's important. Okay. Another aspect of these guys is that Pierre Lafitte was 5 feet 9 inches tall.
That's fairly tall for that century.
Jean Lafitte was 6'2".
Wow.
Okay, so the average height for a man back then, you're looking at 5'6", 5'7". Listen, you and I are fairly the same height, right?
Yeah.
Somebody, 7'5" walks into a room we're hanging out in. What do you think we're going to notice? That person who's really tall. I just, freaked out all the tall people listening. But people notice you. Well, guess what? You take the height, the multiple languages, the ability to be able to read and write, you could probably get some things done in your life. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, born in France. And how they got to New Orleans is a little bit cloudy. Okay, that's where things get a little bit wild. Some people say they ended up down in the Caribbean islands where Haiti is currently, working down there. And then eventually they figured out, oh, wait a minute, there's some things happening between Haiti and New Orleans. And they started coming to New Orleans more often. And then they realized, wait, this is new. This is cool. There's people coming here. We're starting to see some things. We can set up some activity in this area. Opportunity. Follow the money. At the end of the day, follow the money.
How much influence did Jean Lafitte have over the city of New Orleans?
That is interesting. Wow. A lot, I would say. But I think, you got to be careful because we all love to romanticize things.
Right.
This dude wasn't walking around sword fighting with a woman under each arm. Okay. That's what we all think. Okay. He was a businessman. He really was. He was a businessman. Now, that's not to say he didn't do some things. You got to do some things. Sometimes you got to lay down some law, at least your version of law.
Crack a few eggs to make an omelet.
I mean, exactly that. Or heads or whatever the case may be. But he was a guy that, he could really put people together. He was great at networking. You have to think about New Orleans at the time. Okay, you're looking at late 1700s. They didn't get here, Pierre and Jean Lafitte. They got here around 1806. Okay, 1806. We've got a lot of different cultures here. We were French, we were Spanish, tons of French and Spanish being spoken all over our city. Wait a minute, who can speak French and Spanish? Jean Lafitte can. You talk about a guy who can get some things done, right? And we get people from all over the world. We're a port city at that time period. So there are people with multiple languages all over the French Quarter, okay? He can get some things done. He can communicate. If you can communicate with people, guess what? You are already ahead of the game farther than most. So as far as influence goes, there's the romanticized side of it, but then there's the guy who got things done. And one of the things that happens is people have heard of Jean Lafitte, maybe. Nobody knows who Pierre Lafitte is. What happens is Pierre Lafitte and Jean Lafitte, their two stories literally get mushed together into one, and Jean Lafitte gets all the credit.
Oh.
Poor Pierre, he's like, he's shorter, he's a bigger guy, He ends up having a stroke at one point, and his eyes crossed, and he's got a limp. He survives the stroke, which is crazy to think about back then. Mm-hmm. But when he has the stroke, that's when all the crazy stuff starts to take off for the Lafitte brothers. So Jean Lafitte's like this handsome, tall dude. He gets all the credit. Poor Pierre's like, yeah, what about me? So what you hear a lot of is both of their stories put together on Jean Lafitte. So, man, tell you what, happens to be cool to be tall, apparently.
No kidding. And
Tall and
handsome. Yeah.
I mean, who knows,
Who knew?
Right? It works.
I mean, well, I had heard that Pierre was also, kind of on the other side of the law, so to speak, because with Lafitte's blacksmith shop that is on Bourbon Street, A lot of stories around there. So some of it may be attributed to Pierre, some of it may be attributed to Jean, but the story that I have heard is that it was Pierre's blacksmith shop and Jean would steal Spanish doubloons or whatever, and then he would take it to the shop and his brother would melt it down into brick so it wouldn't be as traceable, it wouldn't have certain markings. Is that true? Is that fiction? And what is the significance of Lafitte's blacksmith shop?
Wow. That's the first time I heard that one. That one's good. I like that
It's a good story, yeah.
That
All
one's
the more
awesome.
reason to know if it's true or not.
Wow, that's really cool. I love that story. Wow, yeah. See, but this is where you get wandering out into the weeds.
Right.
Great story. I've heard a million different stories about Lafitte's blacksmith shop. Now, before I go any further about that place, I love that bar.
It's a great bar.
Holy cow. I love it. Not because of the pirate mystique around it. It's just because it's cool.
It is a great
It's
ambiance.
old. They don't turn on any lights. Everyone's good looking in there at night, that kind of thing. But no, sorry about the melting of doubloons, right?
Damn.
You have to keep in mind, okay? And again, I love the place, but I want to kind of get this out there because we talk about this on our tour of the French Quarter. You're a criminal at this point, okay? When the whole Pierre owns a blacksmith shop thing, they're pretty well known, okay? According to all the legends I've heard, everyone kind of knows who they are in the city because they're helping you get things done. They're helping you get things, okay? If you're a known criminal, you gonna hang out in one place all the time? You gonna sit your ass in a building all the time where everyone knows where you're at?
Yeah.
You're probably not gonna do that.
Sitting duck.
Sitting duck, very good. Sorry. A couple things about the actual physical building, Lafitte's blacksmith shop. When it was built, it's a little gray area. What I've found, I've heard 1730s, but it's really probably the 1770 area. Okay, no one can pinpoint. Oh yeah, June 12th. It's 1770s. Doesn't matter. Super old, super awesome.
Right.
A couple things about that building. If you really look at it and you sit there and you look around, that would be a horrible building for a blacksmith shop.
Yeah, that itty bitty fireplace in the middle of it. You can't stoke any fires there.
It's terrible. It's a terrible building for a blacksmith shop. And if you stand outside of it and you look at it, and the more you look at it, you realize, man, that's just a house. Yeah.
Yeah.
The next time you're at the blacksmith shop, stand across the street, look at it, and you're like, yeah, that's a house. Now it's all crooked and beat up. It's because it's old. It was never a blacksmith shop. A blacksmith shop, you need a whole different structure, and you need to be right next to a water source, a river, a stream. As far as I've checked, there's never been a stream down Bourbon Street. So,
Should be, though. Clean up those streets.
some days you really wish there was. So it was never a blacksmith shop, unfortunately. And there's a lot of different speculation on that, but you can check the land records, and no blacksmith shop.
Did Pierre ever own it at any point?
Okay, now to really kind of crap on your story.
No.
But it's all about getting to it. The Lafitte brothers never owned any property.
Damn. All this mystique. I mean, it's still a great bar, but all that mystique just blown out the window.
You need to sell drinks, right?
Right.
And I got no problem with it. I got no problem with them doing what they're doing. I think it's great. I love that place. For years, I got sucked in. I can remember sitting in that bar with friends, sitting in one of those cool tables, candlelit late at night. And you're just sitting there going, I could be sitting where pirates used to hang out. How badass is this, right? That's what's so great about it. But then, I'm just going to ruin it the rest of the way. They never owned any property in New Orleans. You can check all the land records. They didn't. These guys moved around a lot. They were here for a little while, then they'd disappear up to Baton Rouge. They'd go over to Pensacola, or they'd be all over the place, Look, I always put it this way, okay? Say you want to start a life of crime, okay? I'm not suggesting you do. If you do, here's what I suggest first thing you do. Don't own any property.
That makes sense. I mean, it's kind of like if you're a remote worker, why buy houses in multiple different places when you're never really in them?
You're not really in them, okay? If you own property and you're going to become a criminal, look, chances are you're probably going to be pretty bad at the criminal thing, because most people are. You're going to run up debts. Well, guess what do you think those guys who you owe money to are going to do? Hopefully, they're not going to kill you right away. They're going to find what you own, and they're going to go take care of it, and they're going to get their money back. So don't own any property. Plus, you own property, you're a sitting duck. You need to be fluid all the time. Hard to hit a moving target, okay? Really, what's interesting, and I don't know who came up with it. That would be a great question, and I have not figured it out. Who came up with this story? But it's brilliant. But you know what? You get away with a lot in life if you throw the word legend on anything.
Yeah.
If someone disputes the facts, we just go, well, it's a legend, man. I don't, hey, we're saying
I'm
we're
just
using the
messenger.
word legend. Okay, legend basically means 75% crap, 25% real stuff, and we just put it all together to make a cool story. As long as you recognize the word legend, all good, right? We're all cool. What happens is there is a piece of property. If you stand on this across the street from the blacksmith shop, right, and you look at it, okay, you look at the front door, and you're like, wow, this is so cool. I can't wait to go in there and do bad things to my liver. You look to the left where the courtyard bar is, right? It's just an open, empty space. Back around 1900, that was a separate piece of property. It wasn't owned by whoever owns the blacksmith shop now. And there was a small wood building on that property. It was a tinsmith shop. Now,
Interesting.
see?
Okay.
Now, if you're a tinsmith on the side and that's your thing, that's cool. All good. I mean, I love tinsmiths, but if you're going to make a cool legend, you're going to go with tinsmith, which sounds kind of weak. Or are you going to go with a badass blacksmith? See what I mean? You can fudge the edges on history. And then what they do is you take tinsmith shop and you go, boring, blacksmith shop. Perfect. And then you move it next door, right, to where Lafitte's blacksmith shop is today. Now you've got the blacksmith shop part established. Brilliant. Holy cow, how cool is that? And easy, right? Then the Lafitte connection. You got to bring this whole Lafitte brother thing in, right? Somehow. You look next door. If you're standing across the street, again, same spot, and you look to the right, across the street, there's a 3-story tall hotel right there on that corner, Lafitte's Hotel or whatever it's called today. That building was built in 1849. Okay, well, parents are long gone by 1849. Let's just put it that way. Prior to 1849, there was a house on that corner. It's literally across the street, corner to corner, from Lafitte's blacksmith shop. Okay, on the corner where that hotel is today, there was a smaller version of the building that is now Lafitte's blacksmith shop over there. Same style, same architecture, just smaller. That building was owned by a woman, actually. Her name was Marie Villiard. Marie Villiard happened to be Pierre Lafitte's mistress of 16 years.
Oh my gosh.
So where do you think Pierre's going to go hang out from time to time? With the mistress. Hey, what's up? How you guys doing over here? Right? Kids, everything, the whole thing, right? So you just blur the lines again. Legend. Move that next door. Boom. Lafitte's blacksmith shop is born. Yay.
Well, and on the flip side of that, you could make the argument that every legend has a kernel of truth to it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They just kind of went, let's see, we've got all this out here. Let's ball it up together and boom, we got to sell drinks to tourists. Now, I don't know who came up with this story and who put it all together. Brilliant.
Brilliant marketing, yeah.
It's genius. And again, I love Lafitte's blacksmith shop. But, I want to tell you the truth about it, at least as far as I know it. That school that's on the street around the corner, big red school, it used to be Homer Plessy.
Right.
Still is, I guess. They're doing some work on it right now. Around the corner. Well, on that site, in the time of the Lafitte brothers, there was a ballroom and a theater on that site, smaller building. So it was a dual purpose thing, ballroom, theater, right? Now, who do you think goes, not the stereotype, but who do you think goes to the ballroom and the theater?
Upper crust, European old money.
People with money who are all speaking different languages, right? Jean Lafitte was 6'2". He cared about the way he looked. He was handsome. He could speak 4 languages. Where do you think he's going to go all the time?
Great way to pick up women, too.
Well, there is that aspect. I mean, we can go down that road. But really, he's networking. He's hearing. He's listening. He's figuring out, oh, wait, you need lumber for that project you have over on Charter Street? Oh, I'll get you some lumber. No problem. You know what I mean?
Right.
He can be there, and he's got the eyes and ears on the pulse of the city. Learn more languages is my point here.
I've been saying for years, I bet that school is haunted. It's a former theater, you never know.
Well, there's some wild things that happen. And then right next door to where the theater was a very notorious, dangerous, horrible place. That a bar. It was a bar.
Oh,
It's
okay,
where a lot of
bar.
the pirates, they would hang out at.
Well, if Jean Lafitte had a significant amount of influence over networking and business, did he have any influence politically in New Orleans?
That is interesting. Yes, I would say yes. The short answer is totally. How could he not? The reason I say that is because the political influence, a lot of it came from the fact that, you need to get things done, right? He's a guy that needs to get things done. People can be influenced via money. If he's got money, he can get things done. For instance, once he established his little smuggling network throughout Louisiana and New Orleans, he's got pirates now, and he's paying them. He's paying pirates.
Okay.
So if you pay the pirates, right, what happens is they're going to spend their money. And where are they going to spend their money? In the city of New Orleans. Yeah, they're going to get arrested too. Why? Because they're pirates. They're going to do bad things to people. They go to jail. Who's going to get them out of jail? Jean Lafitte is bribing the sheriff who ran the prison. There's some influence for you right there. There was all kinds of different dealings. Oh, look, you could say political influence, but it was really business. He's working with businesses, business leaders. The business leaders will, of course, go to the government. So it's just, it all works together, hand in hand.
So, since he was so heavily involved in the city, can you tell me about Jean Lafitte and his relationship with Andrew Jackson, James Madison, especially with the War of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans? What was his influence and position in that aspect of American history?
That is completely crazy stuff, right? It's a long story, but I'll keep it brief. And in trying to explain it as briefly as I can, Jean Lafitte had a smuggling deal. He started off around 1807, 1808. Okay, we had an Embargo Act of 1807, and we had the African Importation Act of 1807. Essentially, what that did was it shut down trade and labor. You couldn't get any of it. Well, who moved here in 1806? Jean and Pierre Lafitte. Opportunity was knocking, and they did some horrible things. Obviously, that's what they were doing. They were smuggling in humans, and they were smuggling in goods. So over years, when you attack numerous ships from all over the Gulf of Mexico, they're loaded with a lot of things, including gunpowder, cannons, munitions for war. Well, we are going to be attacked by Great Britain here in New Orleans. They had already been kicking our butt all over the Northeast. They burnt down the White House, Washington, D.C., the British did, right? They really wanted the city of New Orleans badly. The British wanted New Orleans because of the fact that if you control New Orleans, what do you control?
The
Mississippi
Mississippi
River. Well, you've cut the United States right down the middle. Done. Game over. So Governor William Claiborne, he was the governor at the time, and he was like, I need help. Send troops here. He's been calling up troops 1813. Please send help to New Orleans. Please send help to New Orleans. He's working with Madison. Come on, send me some people. Well, people are slowly trickling in, but it's not going to be enough people. Andrew Jackson was a general at the time. He's over in Mobile. Claiborne gets word to him, hey, get over here sooner than later because the British are on their way here. They're knocking on our door. And Jackson had about 1,500 men with him. He comes over here. Well, Jackson had been fighting up and down the Gulf Coast. He's got nothing to fight with. He doesn't have enough men. Ultimately, and Jackson did not want to work with Lafitte or the pirates at all. He called them criminals. Well, he was right. Okay, look, in all fairness, he was completely right. Problem they ran into was not enough people showed up to fight, not enough munitions showed up to fight with. So Jackson and the Lafitte brothers had to make a deal. They did. Jackson said, I need your men, I need your supplies, I need your help. Okay, and the Lafitte brothers were like, cool, you could have all our help, but you got to pay all our men who fight for you. And then if we beat the British, which, by the way, highly unlikely, but if we do, anyone left standing, get them pardoned for all their crimes over the years. The Lafitte brothers, anyone else involved. It's a huge ask. Jackson didn't like it, of course. He was like, what? No way. Okay, yeah, I guess we got a deal. Well, so what ends up happening is around 400 pirates show up to fight over at the Chalmette battlefield in 1815. They brought cannons, gunpowder, munitions, their knowledge of those instruments, and they actually had a lot of flints. You need a flint to fire a musket, okay? The Lafitte brothers, for some reason, had a ton of those things. So a lot of the troops up and down the line Jackson on the Chalmette battlefield were using a lot of different things supplied by pirates, right? But if you go a step farther, where do you think that stuff came from? Possibly the British.
Yeah.
Due to the fact that the pirates were robbing from the British and everybody else. So the whole thing is crazy. But yes, they did get involved. And people always ask, well, the Lafitte brothers, were they on the line fighting and swinging their swords and shooting people? No, not at all. Why would they be? They're
If
leaders.
you have money, why?
They're leaders. Actually, Andrew Jackson sent Jean Lafitte, because he didn't trust him. right? He sent Jean Lafitte down to like guard some bayou in case the British tried to come up through some secret, stream or bayou through the marshes. So Jean Lafitte was nowhere near the battlefield. Pierre Lafitte was a brilliant navigator. He was there. He was on the Chalmette battlefield, and he was saying, "Hey, listen, you got to protect the swamp to our left, okay? Because if you don't protect the swamp, the British are going to come in through there." And they ended up building the wall. They built a wall across from the river to the swamp on the Chalmette battlefield. That's where the Americans stood behind and fired all their weapons against the British, who were advancing through the muddy farmland, which is never a good position to be in. Pierre actually was a great assist to Andrew Jackson during the battle and leading up to it in a lot of different ways.
Very cool. And they did get pardoned after all?
That's what's wonderful about this is like, really, when you think about it, okay, the battle, by the way, we won. The battle's over, we win, yay. So what do? We had a 2-day celebration in the French Quarter, well, where now Jackson Square sits. About a month and a half later, James Madison, the president, pardons the Lafitte brothers and all the pirates. Now, what's insane about this is you have to think about that for a second. Jackson had all the pirates in the city. Go round them up. Kill them all. Done. Think about that. He totally could have done that with really not too much trouble. Talk about loyalty, right? He, for whatever reason, and if you could imagine the conversation, okay, how this had to go between Andrew Jackson and the President of the United States. Can you imagine, like, hey, yeah, we won down here. Funny thing though, I gotta let some pirates go free, and they've been robbing us blind for years. I needed their help. Can you imagine how that had to go? That conversation must have been insane. Through letters, of course, I'm sure. But yeah, there's a document out there that James Madison writes, and it's, he's not gonna commit names to it, of course, because these are criminals. But the document goes on to basically say there were some men who did some unfortunate things for many years, but they rose to the challenge, and when we needed them the most, they stood up and they helped us. For all their efforts in helping the United States, they're all free to go, and they're pardoned of all their previous crimes. Now, they screw up again, though. Oh, well, then we're back on the clock of, being criminals again. So if you read it, you're like, oh, wow, I know exactly who they're talking about. They're talking about pardoning the Lafitte brothers and all these pirates down here in New Orleans. It's insane.
Insane chapter of American history. But if people want to know more, what company do you work for? So that way when people come to New Orleans, they can hear more about this story.
We go way in depth on the Lafitte brothers, their beginnings, their journey, their whole thing, and of course it all leads into the Battle of New Orleans, which is absolutely fascinating stuff. We are a company called Pirates of the Quarter Tours. Go to piratesofthequarter.com. We're on social media. Just search Pirates of New Orleans and we're going to come up. Piratesofthequarter.com. We do a walking tour. It's about a 2.5 hour walking tour of the French Quarter. I say 2.5 because, as you know, I can talk forever. So we do on the tours, and it's as factual as we can find the research. Okay, no one can go out there and go, these are facts. We say it's as factual as we have found so far, and we never stop doing the research. So if you're interested in New Orleans history or pirate history, it's a blast. People love it.
Good to know for everyone out there who wants to come to New Orleans. By all means, request the captain specifically.
Please do.
So why do we perceive pirates as the rock stars of the past? Do we romanticize those who have dared to live outside the confines of a traditional job, property ownership, stable family, and following the law because we secretly wonder what it is like to live without a guideline? Do we oversimplify what it means to be a pirate or even what piracy is? Or should we keep the myth alive because it gives us something to talk about over a Sazerac? Have a toast to the ghosts of the past, and we will see you next time at Crescent Crime. Bon voyage.
Dancing in the moonlight on a bright night, a summer night in June, where the geese all are